Live from the home of Al Capone, Michael Jordan, and Deep Dish Pizza. Giving it to you straight from the horse's mouth. Unfiltered and restoring hope to the podcast universe. Gary Franchi.
What is up? Welcome back to the G-Cast. We got to change that intro.
Welcome back. I've been telling you.
I know. I'm going to get it.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
We have a special guest today.
A very special guest, yes.
Yeah. We have America's #1 Trumpocrat, Rod Blagojevich. He's on the show today. This is so awesome. What an honor to have you here.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So we're going to talk about some topics today. What I really want to learn about is what happened. Like, how did we get here? What happened while you were in prison? I also want to try to bring some healing to the people of Illinois as well, because there's a lot of people who are moving out of the state, a lot of people who are concerned about the taxes and the corruption. And I personally believe you are one of the linchpins in helping reveal that corruption, because you saw it firsthand and now you are free to speak about it. So Rod, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Gary, for having me. Angie, hello again. Thank you.
Hello again.
And can I say something real quick?
Sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Over the years, well, not the recent years, but before I was away, I would do a lot of shows, radio, television, maybe a couple of podcasts, but never have I been treated so well with such a wonderful welcome. You provide fruit plates. You provide even ice cream if you choose.
We heard you like ice cream.
Yes. But not this early. But but they don't give you this on CNN. They just give you fake news.
Oh yeah, CNN. Angie and I watched that interview with Anderson Cooper, and we were actually quite disgusted at the way he treated you. What happened there?
Well, I think it was, frankly, they're so filled with hatred towards President Trump that anything President Trump does, they're against. And so I think he was venting against me because of his animosity towards President Trump, and that's what they do, and that's unfortunate because they're doing a disservice to the public and their viewers, because if they're so filled with hate, and hate is toxic.
Hate is toxic. Agreed.
You're not going to do the thing that's right, and you're going to misinform your viewers, and frankly, not keep the trust with them, because there's so much that happens on CNN that is just flat out wrong.
Did you know that the Home and Garden channel actually has more viewers than CNN?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're losing to the Home and Garden channel, Nickelodeon, I believe. So what I like to say is more people like to watch grass grow on the Home and Garden channel than watch Anderson Cooper beat up Rod Blagojevich. So don't worry, not many people saw it. Nobody was watching.
It didn't bother me at all. I mean, I'm used to it, and I'm happy to take on all comers.
Absolutely.
I have the truth on my side, and I'm eager to get it out.
Amen. Amen to that. You know, there was a 5-year investigation, and it came to an abrupt end when the Justice Department leaked information to the Tribune in order to avoid having to arrest Obama's presidential election campaign co-chair Jesse Jackson Jr. for trying to buy Obama's Senate seat. Buy it. I mean, we can talk about that, exactly what the definition of buy is, and what's the price tag. Is it a real price tag? Is it physical? Is it financial? Is it, some political favors? Whatever. We'll talk about that. But President Trump commuted your sentence last month, calling that 14-year sentence ridiculous. Now, I was in the room when it all went down at Trump Tower, when he took the temperature in the room, and it was really remarkable. But getting into politics, you can expect to make friends and enemies. Now, I was doing some Google searching. There's a lot of people that don't like you. They don't like you, man. Even neocon Meghan McCain. I'm no fan of Meghan McCain. She supports the conservative angle now and again, but I don't like her. She called you the swampiest creature in the world. John Cass wrote in the Chicago Tribune of the former Chicago Public Schools CEO who was watching that press conference that you gave outside your house. Now, I was there. I was actually standing right behind you. And,
wow.
Yeah, I was right there. He said he was watching, and he says there was no remorse in you. Now, I was physically maybe 2 feet behind you, and I could really feel the emotion that was coming off of you, coming off your wife. And so I think he's completely wrong there. But the Tribune says, or Cass from the Tribune says, 12 million people of Illinois are victims of Blagojevich. Do you have any remorse or regrets of any of your dealings as governor?
Well, naturally I have regrets. Certain things that I could have done better. Certain things that I didn't do enough for example, criminal justice reform. I could have done so much more in that area. I just didn't know, and I was like most people. I trusted the system, and I believed I frankly believed that the federal prosecutors were honorable and decent. They don't bring fake cases against people, and I still believe most of them are. All of that, they're honorable and decent, but there is a handful of some of the same players using the same playbook. It's Fitzgerald and Comey, Muller, and people like that, who've criminalized routine political practices for political purposes and for financial gain, because when they can get a big target like a governor or a president, they go into law firms and become partners and make millions of dollars. That's what's happened with the prosecutors. In my case, Fitzgerald's a partner in a law firm, I'm told, making all kinds of money. In fact, he's so morally bankrupt that his law firm, now that he's in the private sector, represented Michigan State University, and they whitewashed the investigation against that doctor that was abusing those young girls. So, he's taken that dishonesty that he used as a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, and now moved it into the private sector as a partner in a law firm to do the same kind of thing. And so, Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer wrote just a few years ago and warned about uncontrolled prosecutors bringing criminal charges against government officials for what he described as routine political practices. He went on to point out, and I'm quoting Justice Breyer, to give that kind of power to a criminal prosecutor who is virtually uncontrollable is dangerous to our separation of powers. So I've learned the hard way how dangerous that is, because I was sent to prison for seeking campaign contributions without promising anything or threatening anybody, which means it's legal. Under the standard they used against me, everybody in politics would have gone to prison. I went to prison for a fake charge called sale of ascendancy. That case was reversed by the appellate court. It was never a crime. They described it as, quote, routine political log rolling, end quote. So that's a big lie. And by the way, their pattern, what they do is they come up with these fancy names that are catchy. They label it sale of ascendancy, Russian collusion, but it's all BS. But they start with the big lie, and these are practices that tyrants have used for a long, long time. And some of these people, like I believe is a small handful of these federal prosecutors who've been chasing President Trump and did this to me, are the ones who've done this. And so when I'm asked, do I have any remorse, the answer is absolutely not, because I followed the law. I took an oath of office. I swore on the Holy Bible to protect the Constitution and the rule of law. I wasn't a businessman where I might make a business decision and I would accept a light sentence that they were dangling, because that's what they do. They threaten you with all kinds of long jail time. But if you're willing to play ball and say what they want you to say, they'll give you a shorter prison sentence. My chief of staff was given 10 days in prison to say what they wanted him to say. That was his reward. It turns out that what he pled guilty to wasn't a crime. The appellate court reversed it. Wow. So he's a convicted felon for something that was legal. But his reward was 10 days in prison, and they sent me to prison for 14 years because they're trying to cover up the truth, and they're still doing that because they won't play the tapes.
I want to talk about those tapes in a minute. But you mentioned something before about these parallels between yourself and President Trump, and can you elaborate on that? Like, you were sort of the test case for these guys.
I do think that. I believe that very much, because as I watched from prison what they were doing to President Trump, it was what Yogi Berra said, deja vu all over again. It was also familiar to me. Okay, it starts out with the big charge, and the clever labeling of it, Russian collusion, sale of the ascendancy. And then when the general public, they don't understand a lot of the routine practices in our business. That's understandable. So what these people will do is they'll take some of these things and they'll use the media, and that's certainly been the case against President Trump and with the mainstream media, and particularly with some of the more dishonest places like CNN and MSNBC, and they'll follow a narrative that they're being fed by the prosecutors. So John Cass, for example, is a total lackey for those U.S. attorneys down at 219 Dearborn. And the media here, they have to be careful because it's a barter system with how the media works, because they have these connections with the prosecutor's office, and they've got to, as a practical business decision, they've got to pursue the false narrative that these people want them to pursue. Otherwise, they're fearful they'll lose access to these people in the other cases that might actually be real, because it's a business with these media outlets. And unfortunately for our democracy, many of them have forgotten what their responsibility is as the fourth estate. In other words, they're the ones who are supposed to keep checks and balances on all the power centers in our society so that the truth can come out, and sunshine being the best disinfectant. That's what they're supposed to do, but they don't do that. They're tripping over each other to get the big headline. And so these prosecutors are clever. They know. So you give it a clever name, Russian collusion, sale of the Senate seat, and then they're all running with those stories. And they're not even bothered to check whether or not some of this makes any sense at all. Because if you really think about the whole Russian collusion thing, the whole thing was ridiculous, that anybody would even remotely think it was wrong. And this Ukrainian call, that the President of the United States has a constitutional obligation, if he knows or she knows that there may be corruption, to look into it. And to not look into it is to fail to do his or her duty. So when the President asks Zelensky, the President of Ukraine, would he look into this, because there's probable cause to think that there's something that is not fishy when it comes to your son's, making a whole bunch of money in Ukraine, and Vice President Biden is bragging about using his leverage of $1 billion in American taxpayer money to have a prosecutor in Ukraine fired who's looking into the company that his son works at. Now that's possible corruption. That needs to be investigated and looked into. And yet the idea that that somehow would be an impeachable offense is so preposterous. And yet again, this just shows you what's going on with our country today, and how the weaponization of the prosecutors for political purposes, it isn't just about putting somebody like me in prison for 8 years. This issue is much larger than that. Not even about as much about taking a president out, which is horrific, but it's about all the people, we the people, losing our power to decide who our leaders are through free elections. This is about the right of self-government, and these unelected bureaucrats with fancy law degrees are a direct threat to our freedoms as Americans, and Americans need to wake up and fight against this and demand that the necessary reforms are put in place so these people can be held accountable.
And that's exactly why we started this show. I mean, that's why I got into media, because I didn't like what I saw. I could tell these narratives were contrived, and they were being used to manipulate the American people. And you talk about Russia collusion, that whole thing was running for that narrative 2 years straight. It was being hammered into the American people, just trying to hammer down the American president and just beat him down and wear him down, and then program the American people to believing this to be true. And then, of course, it all backfired. But we want to talk also something about another guy in Illinois. He's been in power for quite a long time. His name's Mike Madigan. His name keeps popping up every time. Now, listen, I've been doing national politics for the longest time, and I literally was so done with Illinois politics, I just surrendered. I'm like, you know what? There's nothing we can do here.
It was a lot to even consider.
It was a lot to get into.
To go after.
But everywhere I looked, Madigan's name pops up. Who is this? Who is this Mike Madigan character in Illinois?
He's the Wizard of Oz of Illinois. He might be the Wizard of Oz of all America. He's a man who works behind the scenes, back room, the quintessential back room pal, who controls the money, and therefore he controls. And I mean, when I say the money, I mean he controls the purse strings of the political process, and the Democratic state lawmakers are completely dependent upon him to fund their campaigns, and so they're beholden to him. And by controlling that money, what he's able to do then is he's able to control the agenda, the legislative agenda, and so now our taxpayer dollars are also controlled by him, because those lawmakers have abrogated their duties as elected representatives to basically cede it to him, and he controls them by funding their campaigns, and he controls them by different things like giving them committee assignments, or maybe pushing a bill or so that they may be interested in so that they can look good back home. But he's got final say on what bills are being called. If he doesn't like a bill, he simply doesn't call it. And then he rewards these lawmakers. When I left home about 8 years ago, I think every single Democratic state representative was given a committee chairmanship, which means they all got paid an extra $5,000 or $10,000 of our tax dollars to be on committees. Now, if everybody's a committee chairman, that means you've got more committees than you need, because it's not supposed to be like that. And the way Madigan controls the money is he works with the special interest groups, and they're the ones who understand where the real power is. And so he's the one that they give the campaign contributions to. And now what you have in Illinois is a remarkable phenomenon that was very different from how it was when I was governor. And that's that our governor, J.B. Pritzker, who inherited a family fortune from the Hyatt hotels. He didn't make that money. He inherited it. He was born with a silver ladle in his mouth. But he gave Mike Madigan, I learned this just recently, $7 million of his own personal money to Mike Madigan's campaign fund.
That sounds like what they call that pay to play. Sounds like
well,
a little bit, maybe?
A little bit there, yes.
And he did it for political purposes, but I think the fact that Madigan is calling his legislative agenda and they're pushing things like a tax increase and things like that, it's because I think Madigan is basically getting the money from JB, the campaign money, and he's agreeing then to pursue the legislative agenda that Pritzker wants. Now, it's a crime only if they've got some deal between the two of them where the one promises something, I'll give you $7 million in campaign funds in exchange for you, Mr. Speaker, passing my legislative agenda. That would be criminal. But if they don't say those things, if it's just sort of like, I'm going to kiss this guy's ass and give him all that money, hoping that he'll push the legislative agenda, unless they change the laws, that's still those are typical practices. However, this is unusual that the money is so big, and it should be offensive to the people of Illinois that, they've got a governor who is basically paying tribute money to the speaker in order to get the legislative agenda passed. And then I'll say this. Under the standard that they used to convict me, that these two guys, if I got 14 years, they'd probably spend 150 years each for the amounts of money that they've dealt with. But here's what I'd like to say to Governor Pritzker. If you really care about the people, and if the Democratic Party is truly the party that we were supposed to be, the party for the little guy, the ordinary, hardworking American, then why don't you use all that personal money of yours, contribute to Madigan's campaign, and get Madigan to pass a tax cut for the middle class and for working people? Because there's money in Springfield that people don't realize. When I was governor, Madigan asked me if I would give him 2.5% of my campaign fund. I politely declined. He actually requires tithing. 2.5% of what you have in your campaign fund should go to Speaker Madigan.
Did he call it that? Tithing?
Some of them, he doesn't directly call it that, but it's tithing to Madigan. It started, it started when I was a state lawmaker back in the early 1990s. He was the speaker even back then. You have to realize Madigan's been there for about 100 years, and he's been blocking progress for all that time, and he's the quintessential boss in Springfield.
So backtrack, you said
yeah.
He asked you for 2.5%.
Yeah, 2.5% of my campaign fund. This was January, I think it was the 14th of January. It was a Sunday in 2006 when I was running for re-election. At that time, I think I had $12 million in my campaign fund.
And you declined?
I politely declined. It was a meeting that we had at my campaign office. I think it was a Sunday afternoon. His daughter, Lisa Madigan, the Attorney General, was sitting right there, and and she, had the ability to investigate me, and so I felt the pressure that she could investigate me if I'm not helping her dad. But again, nothing was said, so those are things that, are revolting, but they're not necessarily illegal. Senate President Emil Jones was there, the Comptroller Hines was there, I think Jesse White was there, and so I declined politely, saying that I needed the money for my re-election, and that if I ran stronger at the head of the ticket, the Democratic candidates on the lower ballots would do better.
So all of those people were in the room when he asked that?
I'm just picturing that.
Yes, they were.
Did you feel intimidated to decline politely? Or how did it feel? Were you ready to say no?
Well, I was ready to say no, and I knew what he was doing because he'd done this before. So, in politics, Harry Truman defined courage as being the ability to say no to a friend. So I used that line on Madigan. It didn't work. I predicted that when I turned him down, that he was going to be difficult when I was reelected, that he would be blocking our legislative agenda in the second term, and he did. So I was right about that prediction. JB understands that if he wants to get his stuff passed, he needs to contribute huge amounts of campaign funds to Madigan's
Hold that thought.
fund.
We're going to be right back on the flip side of this break with Rod Blagojevich.
The G-Cast will be right back after this short break from our sponsors. G-Cast After Hours is back.
Yeah. There it is, the Fountain, Chicago. And we're back, G-Cast.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah. We got a
Welcome back
guest.
to Chicago.
Home, sweet home. Sweet home,
This
Chicago.
is so welcoming.
Sweet home, Chicago.
And the land of Lincoln.
Oh, my, yes. Do you plan on doing any sightseeing? Anything you missed here? Any of the museums? Any old places that you really would love to see again right now?
I have a long list. I've had almost 8 years to think about it. Yeah, I missed a lot of places. I want to go to Lincoln Park Zoo. I love that little place.
Oh, we love that place too.
I want to see the Cubs play at Wrigley Field.
Yes.
I want to see the White Sox play. I miss them too. I miss all kinds of places.
So were you Cubs or Sox?
Cubs.
Oh, good,
Yeah.
good. I was hoping you'd say that.
Cubs.
Oh.
Giordano's or Lou?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
both.
That's typical political response there. He's a politician. He's a professional. Speaking of professional politicians, we were just talking about Mike Madigan, and what kind of relationship did you really have with the guy? I mean, he's asking you for 2.5% of your campaign money. You're in a room full of people, and you're like, "No, not going to do it." And then he blocks your entire legislative agenda, and then what happens?
Well, then obviously the relationship soured at that point. Yeah, it was up and down. I mean, he's the quintessential practical politician. He doesn't stand for anything. He squandered an opportunity to really do good because he has so much power. I would have these discussions with him and try to encourage him to move certain things that I thought were important, like providing affordable health care without raising taxes on people. There was a way to do it, and we made so much progress with our All Kids program, getting children health care and their parents, and it's a way where you combine the private sector and government to give people choices and options.
I was actually a beneficiary of that program.
I'm so glad to hear that.
My mother worked really hard to get me into that. God rest her soul. Yeah, she really Yeah, it was very important for our family. It helped us.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll give you an insight from the inside. The way I got that passed was October of 2005, and we'd made progress in the first 2 years. First 2 years that I was governor.
Maybe I'm thinking of a different program. When did that program come to play?
You would have been too young for this, but it could apply to your children. But it seems to me like you're
All
financially
kids.
doing good.
Yes. At one point, that program helped with our firstborn.
Oh, good.
We were uninsured.
Yes, there
and
you go.
We were not nowhere near as successful as we are right now. But
Right.
without that program, I mean, that was life-saving for us. Absolutely.
Yes. Oh, I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
that. That's very
Yeah.
gratifying to
Yeah.
me. Well,
I was thinking of a different program when I was younger, in my teenage years.
one of I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers are frustrated with politics and government. This explains a lot of President Trump, the Trump phenomenon. The fact that the people are just sick and tired of the same old baloney from political leaders, half measures dressed up as solutions. They're not problem solvers. They don't want to solve problems. They want to keep the problem out there so they keep the people needing them. Now you got this guy, businessman, hugely successful in business and in entertainment, and everything he touches, Trump has the Midas touch. It's among the reasons why I truly believed he was going to win when he announced. Then he comes to Washington, and he's actually doing something, are you ready for this? That shocks the political establishment.
What's that?
Keeping his promises. Keeping his promises to the people.
Oh, yeah.
It is shocking to them because they think it's all part of the skills that you have as a politician. Like Michael Jordan had such a wonderful jump shot, and he was so good. And Jordan could play great defense, and he had all aspects to his game. These politicians look at these skills, the ability to be full of crap, okay, the ability to make promises you have no intention of keeping, the ability to change positions. Nancy Pelosi could be against the impeachment of President Clinton because it's setting a dangerous precedent, and you're criminalizing and using the impeachment process, which is supposed to be very rare, for political purposes, and yet she can flip-flop, as can Schumer and a whole bunch of others.
Look at Nadler, the stuff that Nadler was saying.
Jerry Nadler, who I was in Congress with together, we were all against impeaching Clinton for what he did. It was wrong and terrible, but was that an impeachable offense? We thought it wasn't. How could that standard then be different when they then use it against President Trump? See, they have the ability to just flip-flop without any sense of conviction or principles. And then they, amongst themselves, Chuck Schumer, another one, they like to brag about, frankly, Senator Durbin, a total professional politician. He's good at it, but he's a total professional politician. They don't want to solve problems. And then when they're amongst themselves, they laugh about how, are you ready for this? They laugh about how their game is good. Look at me. I was duplicitous today. I flip-flopped on something that just a few short years ago I took another position on. Not because of principle, but because of expediency. And so the people sense that intuitively, hence they elect Trump. Trump is actually keeping those promises, and he's fighting. And you ask about enemies. You say, I have enemies. I consider that a badge of honor, because Franklin Roosevelt was right when he said, you have enemies. That's good. That means you stand for something. And so the president is getting all the pushback he gets because he's actually keeping his word to the people. He's doing the things he said he was going to do. And so you got these establishment politicians, swamp in Washington, swamp in Springfield, and Madigan is the king of the swamp creatures in Springfield.
So when we were in that room and the president was taking the temperature and we said, yes, free Blago.
Thank you.
Right, free Blago. And then the other side of the room, you had some politicians grumbling, oh, no, we don't want to let him out. Let him out. No, no, no. And, of course, you have the list of GOP representatives. You have Darren LaHood, John Shimkus, Adam Kinzinger, Rodney Davis, Mike Bost. All these guys signed a letter saying, don't let Blago out. Is it because they're afraid of Mike Madigan?
No, I don't think so. They've left Madigan. They're now congressmen. They're Washington people. So
what about the state reps, though?
The state reps are terrified of Madigan, yeah, and they're beholden to Madigan, and they're completely controlled by Madigan. The Democratic ones, the Republicans, different, but those Republican congressmen, I agree with their sentiments, but they're pointing it in the wrong direction. It ought to be at those prosecutors and frankly, the political establishment in Illinois that I think had a hand on all of that, all of what was done to me. You know, I wouldn't raise taxes on the people, and I fought my own party over that. I predicted before I was arrested, and then after I was arrested, that if once they got me out of office and I was taken from office, which happened, that the Democrats would pass a big tax increase, and they did. It was within a few months they increased taxes by the exact amount I predicted, 60% increase. It went from 3 to 5%. I'm told now they just raised the taxes again a couple of years ago, the income tax on people. People are leaving Illinois because our taxes are so way too high, and yet there's billions of dollars in 720-something special purpose funds that carry surpluses that are protected by the special interest groups, and their chief protector is, guess who? The Wizard of Oz, Mike Madigan. When I was governor, it was a fight every single year to get that money and take that money and use that to provide health care to the kids and all kids, to provide breast and cervical cancer screenings for uninsured women and the treatment.
I remember that too. Oh my gosh.
By the way, I couldn't pass that. They wouldn't call the bill. Madigan was holding it hostage. So I did it on my own through executive order. And they threatened to impeach me over that because they said I didn't have the power. I said, take me to court. But they wouldn't dare do that because that would be something that would come back and bite them. But we did all of that by moving the money around rather than asking the people for more of their money. And what I discovered when I became governor was you had billions of dollars that were there to be used for the people if you can just unlock it, because they were being protected by the special interests, and their guardian was Mike Madigan.
Now we got a gas tax. Thank you for that, Springfield. Now you talk about the graduated income tax that Pritzker's pushing.
By the way, that's a Trojan horse. If they get away with that, what they're gonna do is they'll call that, tax the rich, but that's only gonna establish the foothold, and then it won't be long before they start raising taxes on the middle class and everybody else. That's what their game is. That's what their motive is. They're dressing it up as a progressive tax increase.
Where was Pritzker on your release? Where did he stand on that?
I was disappointed to hear that he was vocally opposed to it, and it's disappointing because JB and I've known him for a long time, and I always felt he was a pretty good guy, and he contributed over $100,000 to my campaigns. I mean, he didn't treat me like he treats Madigan, but he was, generous to me in my campaigns. He asked me to make him senator in 2008. He was one of the many people who wanted to be senator. When I politely told him it was unlikely that I would pick him, he then asked me if I could make him a comptroller or a treasurer, one of those offices he thought was going to be available. I was surprised he was interested in it. I appointed him director of the Human Rights Commission because he asked for that in 2003. So I was very surprised to hear that when President Trump wasn't potentially going to let me out in August, JB got a hold of him and asked him not to do it.
We're going to be right back. On the flip side of this break, we're going to dig
so much more to keep talking about
into Pritzker and the people who didn't want you out and why. We'll be right back.
Be right.
We've gotta pay a few bills over here, so sit tight, and the G-Cast will return in a few moments. time to return to the G-Cast with your host, Gary Franchi.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is a very special event today for Gary, my husband, and I. And thank you, Rod, for joining us here.
Thank you, Angie.
Oh, boy. Let's get back to this. Let's talk about the people who did not want to see you get out of jail.
You mean some of the political figures?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So what would you like to know? Why do you think they didn't want me
We're
to?
talking about
We're talking about Pritzker initially.
Yeah.
And like, where was Obama? Like, I was thinking, like, when he got into office, I was for certain that you would be let out. Like, that was just going to be.
Did you
a
feel that
foregone
way,
conclusion.
or was it just not shocking at all that he didn't help?
It's funny you asked me that. You know, when I first entered prison, which was the 15th of March, 2012, on a Thursday.
Coming up on your anniversary.
Yes, and obviously for me a very dark day. But when my fellow inmates, and I was put in a prison that was a higher security. I think I'm the only governor to be in a prison behind the razor wire, the barbed wire fence, and you're in there with guys who are cartel members and a lot of drug dealers. There were murderers there, and
Your family must have been terrified for you.
there were bank robbers, and they got the whole culture of groups, and they call them cars. And anyway, it's a fascinating kind of community, and you learn to adapt, and that wasn't hard for me. But my colleagues would say to me, "Don't worry about Obama, will take care of you." And I would get defiant, and I'd say, "I don't need him. I'm going to win the appeal. I've got the law on my side. I can't possibly lose." They sent me to prison for things that are legal and political and routine. I never took a dime. This is not about personal corruption. It's all politics. And then I would say, all I need is the appellate court to see that the way they convicted me was using an unlawful standard, that the case McCormick versus United States, and it's there for any of your listeners and viewers to see, 1991 case that defines where the line is. And the line is, unless you have evidence of an express promise or threat, then it's just routine politics. So there was never that. They don't allege that. So the way they convicted me was they misled the jury. They lied to the jury with fake jury instructions by moving the line, and said that if I have conversations and seek campaign contributions from anyone that might benefit from the actions of me as governor, think about this, that if that standard were applied to everybody in politics, every senator who votes for a bill that supports the pharmaceutical industry and then gets campaign contributions from them, they'd be thrown in prison. Anytime anybody does anything and seeks campaign contributions from people who benefit from their work would be thrown in prison.
Look at Bloomberg. Bloomberg just on one of the debate stages, I believe, he said, or maybe it was just a town hall, he was just speaking, and he said, I bought those politicians. I bought all these California seats, and he spent $100 million doing so, and he's boasting about it. Now, he caught himself when he said, I bought them. He caught himself. So, in that case, would that be illegal?
No.
Compared to your situation?
Well, in my situation, of course, he just admitted to the crime, and if it's that kind of money, he's facing 100 years. But it's not. Now, should it be? That's a different issue. I mean, is the system so it caught up with campaign contributions that it should be reformed? I've always believed that that's the case. On the other hand, you can't fight entrenched political bosses who protect swamps like Madigan unless you're strong politically. I was able to fight through all of that and get health care for all kids, mammograms and for uninsured women, preschool for all 3-year-olds, not raise taxes on the people. The stuff we did was in spite of Madigan, because I was strong politically, because I had the resources that I had to work hard to raise, so I could do it. I didn't have to be beholden to him, because that's what he wants you to be. That's what these people do. And that Washington establishment, this is what they want President Trump to do, and he won't do it. So, yes, it would be better if there's a better system. But under the current rules, you should play by those rules. I stayed within the lines. If they used that standard against others, they'd all be in prison. Now, having said that, why didn't they want me out? Because I think that they know what the truth is, and they understand that, I think I can speak to a lot of the things that are truly wrong in Illinois politics. Our politics in Chicago and Illinois is corrupt and has been for generations. There's a way of doing business that's corrupt. Some of it's illegal. A lot of it's legal corruption. What do I mean by that? They're just full of crap when they talk about the things they care about that they're going to do for people, and they don't do it. It's all a game. And so they'll dress things up, half measures, and they'll say they've done things for people, but they won't solve problems. That's what I'm talking about, corruption, and it's controlled by the government center, Washington, Springfield, and the people in that world, the lobbyists and the lifetime staffers. It's what I call the political industrial complex. They're the ones who control it. So when I came as governor and I vowed to change business as usual, and I started shaking things up, fighting with the legislature, we had more special sessions than any governor in history. I kept calling them into session, and they hated me for it. I understood that. But I was trying to basically bludgeon them into doing what I thought was the right thing for the people. Again, I see it on a much larger level with President Trump and the change he's bringing in Washington. That establishment fights back, and it tends to be bipartisan because they're used to a way of doing business. You get elected as a young state lawmaker, you give all these promises to the people in your community, and the moment you get down to Springfield, the staff, this is the same in Congress, the staff gets a hold of you, the leadership gets a hold of you, and they show you the ropes, and this is how we do things down here. And suddenly all the stuff you said to the senior citizens back home, or to the single mom who's struggling to raise her family, all those things become less important. You've become co-opted by that system. Wow. And it's really a big deal in Washington. That's how the system works.
You have
Political,
such incredible
industrial
insight
complex.
on this. Such incredible insight on this. And anyone who's following your story should be championing for you to speak out because of your insight.
I hope. Are we on? I hope so.
Yeah, I think the microphone down below.
Oh.
Watch your foot there.
Oh, very good.
Did I kick it?
Yes.
How about now? Oh.
I think we're off again, Angie.
Mm-hmm.
Check the cable down there.
Oh.
There we go.
It's my lucky shoe.
It's your lucky shoe.
That was funny. All right. But what I was saying is because your insight is so deep that people really should be championing for you to speak out no matter what, whether they agree for you to be out of prison or not. They really need to allow you to speak and stop attacking you.
I don't mind the attacks. I'm used to them. If I'm speaking the truth, I'm going to get attacked.
Yes.
Because that always happens. It's always been the case throughout history. And all you got to do is read the Bible. I'm not comparing myself to anybody in the Bible except to say that I draw great inspiration from the Bible. And I really spent a tremendous amount of time in prison, which helped me feel so much less alone by reading God's Word. And it is the nature of people that you're going to have periods where there's people become complacent and do things a certain way, and they lose sight of what they're really supposed to be doing, and then along the way somebody comes along and tries to shake things up and change things, and then there's pushback. So I expect the attacks, and they don't bother me at all. After what they did to me, nothing really can hurt me except, God forbid, someone harms my family. But I do feel this, and this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's the story of Joseph, Genesis 38-50. Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery, and then he's taken away because they were jealous of him, and then he was put in prison for something he didn't do. But then because he could interpret dreams, he was brought to the attention of the Pharaoh in Egypt. He was able to give him the advice that helped Egypt become strong and prosperous. And then during a famine, his family, many years later, reconnect with him. But the older brothers who did this to him after their father died were fearful of Joseph's wrath. But Joseph said to them this famous line, quote, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." I choose to look at the affliction and the loss that I suffered when they brought my life to ruin as a time in the wilderness where I could hopefully be refined by the fire I was put through and actually serve some good purposes one day. I truly believe that is what I must do. And so criminal justice reform is something that I feel I could speak to, and President Trump is doing more on this issue
he really is.
than anybody ever did before, and is determined to do more, I think. And I think talking about how dirty and corrupt the political system is, I think I can be helpful in some ways to at least get the attention of somebody. And so I'm a free man, and I'm eager to do it, and there's nothing they can do to hurt me.
Yes.
Well, I think that you are supposed to be out now. This is what your mission is to help restore the state, restore the state, and get rid of this corruption, because people are suffering in this state. And You have a unique insight into helping reverse some of that. But where was Obama? Whatever happened to Obama? He
yes.
Just completely ignored you?
After we were, after the appellate process was partially successful, they reversed the sale of the Senate seat, never a crime, but they upheld the fundraising allegations. They were wrong to do that. And they basically whitewashed what was done because we had a 95-page appeal and their response was something like 20 or 30 pages. They ignored most of the issues because they couldn't answer them, so they simply ignored them. But my sentence was vacated, and so I went from 14 years to nothing. And so by the time I had served 4.5 years or so, we went back to a resentencing on the 9th of August, 2016, with the hope and the expectation that I'd probably go home because I had already done more time. I did 4.5 years more than any politician ever in American history whoever was convicted of anything that had to do with campaign contributions only. I mean, there were politicians who took bags of money for themselves or took, free vacations or things like that, which I never did.
Who?
Well, several. There was, frankly, Governor Ryan, and there were Giles. There's several, but I'm the only one who actually did any time at all for campaign contributions.
They went the hardest on you.
And that no one ever did a day as an elected official for that. And here I had done 4.5 years. Anyway, the judge puts me back at 14 years. And so the last line of defense was to ask President Obama if he would commute my sentence. And, because of what I used to be and some of the relationships I have, I know that I had David Axelrod, for example, was very kind in helping. He was my political consultant when I was a congressman. He'd been President Obama's political consultant in his race for president. And he was working with my wife Patty, to encourage President Obama to commute my sentence. And he actually delivered, as I understand, two letters from my daughters, Amy and Annie, who are the same age as President Obama's beautiful young daughters. And they were from my daughters, on behalf of one father to another man who was the father of two daughters. And then we also were sensitive to his politics, and so we asked, we understand you're going to leave office on the 20th of January, 2017. You don't want to have your exit be mired with me and all the mess that's involved with me, so if you would just be so kind as to leave on in January of 2017, but cut my sentence in half from 14 years to 7, I still will have done more time than any governor in history, and I'll limp home in October of that year. Wow. So I was surprised that he didn't do it, and I was particularly surprised because he had actually commuted the sentence of a terrorist who wanted to blow up federal buildings, and he commuted the sentence of a guy who had been convicted of treason, and had done several years in prison, but maybe 7 or 6. Bradley Manning and Chelsea Manning, and he had commuted her sentence. And so I was pretty confident that he'd probably send me home, since actually the whole discussion on the Senate seat. Well, the whole discussion of the Senate seat began with Obama, because a labor boss named Tom Balanoff came to me and said that, quote unquote, he testified to this at 2 trials, that President-elect Obama called him the night before the election and asked him to come and see me and discuss his choice for the Senate seat and see what I might be interested in. And so the whole conversation on what we might or might not horse trade with began with President Obama's emissary. So the expectation was pretty strong that he would do it, but he didn't. And here's something that I think speaks well to President Trump. When it comes to testicular virility to do the right thing, Trumps Obama.
I think you're right there. Yeah, some people do question the virility of Barack, but maybe we can have that conversation another day. We got to jump to a break real quick. We went a little bit long in that segment because we want to get to the bottom of where in the world was Barack Obama. Did I really do that? Okay.
Oh, you did. Your dad.
Yeah. We'll be right back on the flip side of this break. We are with Rod Blagojevich. He is the America's leading Trumpocrat.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back.
Don't go anywhere. Gary Franchi will be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to the G-Cast.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
We are on the G-Cast After Hours with Rod Blagojevich. It's an honor to have you here in studio with us.
Thank you.
We're peeling the layers of the onion back on Illinois corruption and the parallels that your case, the attacks on your executive office, mirror President Trump, and of course a lot of the same players involved. But I think what we really would like to know is some of the things that happened to you while you were in prison. You had to endure so much.
Is there any particular people that you are remembering now that you're out, especially considering reform right now? Is there anyone that you keep close in your mind, thinking about them, praying for them, wanting to help them even?
All those things.
Paying it forward,
well
in a
said.
sense, right?
Yeah, thank you, Angie. That's a great question. All of those things, and there's several of them. I met probably a few thousand inmates in my nearly 8 years in prison. And the first 32 months was in the higher security, as I described a little while ago. And then the last 5.5 years or so were in the camp, which is not as challenging. It's less like a prison. But as far as I'm concerned, when you're forced to be separated from your loved ones, your children and your wife, the things that you love most in the world, you could be in Tahiti on a beach. In my opinion, that's almost like a prison. But I learned so many things. I learned about just how corrupt and broken the criminal justice system is and how racist it is. It truly is a racist criminal justice system that disproportionately discriminates against African Americans and people of color. And it's understandable that there could be so much anger in the African American community in particular when you think about the history of our country. So
Sure.
You've got 250 years of slavery, and then that's finally eradicated through Abraham Lincoln, a Republican president. Then you have the whole new portion of our history, separate but equal, segregation. And if you're an African American person, you can't sit at the lunch counter with a white person if you live in Alabama. And then that takes 100 years to rectify that. Not to mention the fact that even in the North, if you were black, you couldn't get jobs. So they weren't hired. You can
Terrible
work out
times.
You can work in the post office, and you can work in the railroad industry as a car porter. But there weren't opportunities. And so then 100 years later, we have the civil rights movement and a lot of changes being forced, interesting enough, to break down the Democratic establishment in those southern states that were the ones who were protecting that old racist system.
Don't tell anyone.
But now here we are in the next several generations, and we've had the first African-American president, which was historic. And if nothing else about President Obama, that was a very good thing to have happened. And yet, what do you have? You've got what the author Michelle Alexander has called the new Jim Crow in America, because you got a whole group of young black men taken out of the community, put in prison for long sentences for first-time, nonviolent offenses like drug dealing. Now, they shouldn't do it, and they should be held accountable, and there should be some necessary punishment. But when you're a first-time nonviolent offender like my friend Joe Nair, who I left behind, and he's given 26 years in prison, and he's a young man, and he's got young children, and a mother who loves him, and you can see her pain in the visiting room when she visits her son. You can see it in her eyes. And then you say, but a rapist today, the average time a rapist spends in prison, violent felons like a rapist, 4 years. Something's not right with the system.
Something is not right.
And
so much is not right.
And I saw so much of that in terms of the over-sentencing of so many of the inmates I was with. And here again, President Trump is doing something the Democrats talk a big game about but don't solve. And they don't want to solve it. That's the cynical part that's disgusting. Okay? Dick Durbin, our senator, Joe Biden, former vice president, senator from Delaware, voted with President Clinton to push the 1994 crime bill, which led to the most dramatic increase of incarceration of African-American men than any law in American history. This is the Democratic Party that gets 90+% of the African-American vote. This is how they treat their constituents. And they want to keep it that way because they keep them beholden, and the way they keep them beholden and angry is they point fingers at the other side by using the racist word when somebody like Trump tries to actually change something, and yet look at his deeds. They're a lot better than his creeds, okay? They're actually matching what he says. He's actually doing something on criminal justice reform with the historic First Step Act, and it's leading to the release of many who've been over-sentenced, and I saw some of them leave before I left, because a guy, Patrick Williams from Chicago, West Side, close to where I grew up, 12 years he did on a 20-something year sentence because of the First Step Act. First-time nonviolent offender, he was able to go home and get a chance to start rebuilding his life. And there's a lot that has to be done in terms of opportunities for jobs and others. But this is a first step in the right direction. And it was President Trump who did it, not President Obama.
Wow.
And that's what we need to unite about. This is so much bigger than party lines.
That's the problem with American politics, because for most of them in both parties, frankly, it's party before country. And it's very disillusioning.
Yes.
What kept you going through the dark times in prison?
First and foremost, my love for my children and my wife. My need to be strong for my kids. I could never give up, because they're the most important thing to me. And so I had to tough it out and be strong, and had to show them that I could handle it, and that it wasn't really as difficult as it really was. I never let them think that.
Right.
But they gave me strength. You know, Viktor Frankl wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor. I'm not comparing myself to that. I got to say these things because the media, they always twist stuff.
Because Anderson Cooper did that exact same thing.
Yeah. So
this is what gave you strength.
It did. And he writes about how when everything else is taken from you, you can still find purpose in your life through the contemplation of the people that you love. And that was so true. And I love that. It spoke to me. And so I thought of my daughters, and so every day was a challenge to be strong for them. And then I got inspiration from my wife's strength, because she's a hero. She's a single mother, raising our kids the way she did. Both of my daughters, you know, are good, honest girls, and they love their mother, and they're right to do it. And then my faith in God was very helpful to me, and I was able in prison to do something I never did before, and that is to actually read the Bible slowly, carefully, and every day in ways where I could not rush through anything, and think about it and apply it to my circumstances and the circumstances of others. So among the many things the Bible teaches me is service to others.
Service to others,
It's also enduring your hardship in a way that would be pleasing to God, and to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So all of those things, my daughters, my wife, and my faith, which got stronger, helped me through it. And then my desire to make myself somehow, to improve myself while I was there, trusting that in God's good time there would be a day when I would finally go home. And it happened in, I believe, a way where the hand of God is involved, that a guy like Donald Trump, who I never imagined would ever run for public office, become president of the United States, and I would have been on his television show, The Celebrity Apprentice, a show that I never watched until I was on it.
We watched it. We loved that show. We used to watch The Celebrity Apprentice all the time.
Yeah.
And we're like, there's Rod. Like, whoa, wait, doesn't he have a case pending right now? And like, he's on the Apprentice.
Right.
What's up
it was
with
such
that?
a great way to humanize you. Obviously, us not knowing you and the public, it was really nice.
He was really nice to me. Real kind man, by the way. People don't realize that. I'll tell you a little story. So it's the last episode, and it was filmed in October of 2009 until you're fired, and then you got to go home, and the contract says you can't say you got fired when you got fired. And so when that happened to me, and he was kind the way he fired me. It was actually kind of nice the way he did it.
Yeah, he had a way of doing the firing. That was incredible too, yeah.
Right. So then they invite you back in March for the final episode, where the final two are and it was this rock star named Bret Michaels.
Oh, yeah.
From a group called Poison. Good, nice guy from
We grew up with Poison playing on the cassette.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
I have a confession to make. I never heard of him until I was on that show, and all these women were all over this guy.
You were an Elvis guy.
An Elvis guy. By the way, Bret Michaels is an Elvis guy, too.
I could see that.
Yeah. A nice guy, good guy. So he was on the show, and he was in the finals with Holly Robinson Pete, a very nice person as well. Her husband was the quarterback, Rodney Pete, played for the Eagles and the Cowboys. Anyway, they were in the finals. And so they invite those of us who've been fired back. So Cyndi Lauper came back, and Sharon Osbourne came back. And,
what a fun group, huh?
Daryl Strawberry, Sinbad the comedian, anyway, Goldberg the wrestler.
I'm remembering the team for the show, yeah.
And I came back, and it's filmed before New York University, and I think it was at New York University, before a live audience of hundreds of people in there. And among the audience was Patty and my 2 daughters, Amy and Annie. And Annie would have been 6, and Amy would have been 13 going on 14.
Wow. Okay.
And so they're little girls, and the questions about my innocence came up, and I asserted my innocence again, and I've been doing that all the time. And the audience kind of laughed derisively, right? I can handle it. I chose to be in that business, but my daughters are out in that audience.
Yes.
Well, when the show's over, we're on an elevator, and it just so happened Donald Trump walked into that elevator, and I introduced him to my wife and my 2 daughters. And when we finished the elevator ride, no cameras, nothing. He's tall. He's
very tall. Yes.
And he bent down to be eye level with my 2 little girls, and he said real nice things about their dad, because he remembered that the audience had kind of mocked their father. And he didn't have to do that. And there were no cameras around, and nobody was getting press on doing it. It was just a real natural thing from a man who's fundamentally kind-hearted. I truly believe that about him. And he just gets a bad rap in the press because that's the nature of the business too. But he's strong and tough, and
he's strong and tough. That's right.
And he'll do fine.
And so are you, and you are strong and tough, and you will do fine.
I do believe I'm strong and tough. About doing fine at it, I'm hopeful.
Well, you've got an incredible team at home. Your beloved wife, Patty, and your 2 daughters. You said you had a list.
Yes.
What is something that you guys are going to be doing together?
Well, my daughter Annie works so hard in school, and she's doing homework every night. Very hard, actually. And she plays the piano, and I'm very proud of her. And this, again, is a reflection of their mother, that during those hard years that she was able to get our kids focused on positive things like that. I know
she played such a big part in the background while you were in prison.
Remarkable.
She was working so hard for her 2 daughters. She was able to stay in her home, continue a career for herself, meanwhile trying to keep strong for you.
Well, I saw her media appearances.
Yeah. Incredible woman.
Yes.
I saw her media appearances, and they were powerful. And that was one of the things that really hit me too. I mentioned to you before the interview was when the president said he saw the pain in your wife, and he recognized that you had missed the graduation of your daughter. And I said to myself that enough is enough. You know, what did this guy do? You know, he served his time, and for what? You know, there was never, and nothing was ever sold. It was just discussion. And there was never nothing, you know.
It was all political talk, and I never took a penny. But look, the story of Lot's wife in the Bible. Don't look back, right? There's a lesson in that. Learn from the past, and then use it to look to the future. And that's where I'm doing. And my goal is to try to do good. And I think that's how you serve the Lord, is by trying to do good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And today's a beautiful day. Today's the anniversary of when you first met your wife, Patty.
Yep, March 6, 1988.
How cool is that?
It's a Sunday. She was wearing a red dress, and I told her I'd show her, after she'd come out with me, I showed her the time of her life. Little did she know.
It continues to keep coming. Yes. Aw. So today's a celebration.
What was the first meal you had when you got home?
Okay, so I came home that night late, so I didn't eat. And then the next day, I made some public remarks. And then we did a Fox interview, and then I came home, and I had a big salad because my daughters and Patty are all vegans now, and so they eat this kind of alternative kind of
something you're not used to
menu, right? But let me say this: it was very good. It was great.
Sure,
the taxpayers should feel at peace that the Bureau of Prisons is not wasting their money on the quality of food, because the food in prison, frankly, sucked. But I think it was one of those vegetable meals, I think. And
do you feel like you're going to go towards being a vegan now?
No, absolutely not. You know, you're Greek, right?
I am.
Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher, said all things in moderation.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that you say that. That's my belief. That's what we teach our kids.
A
little of this, a little of that. And that's what the G-Cast really is. We are here to talk about everything, put it all out there, you know, and give an opportunity to for people to speak.
It's great what you guys are doing. This is helping our democracy. I'm not here to pander to you because you've been so nice to me, but...
Well, keep pandering. That's fine.
Alternative, okay. I made a living on that. But alternative media and getting the word out through other places than the traditional the traditional venues is vital to our democracy. And this is why Trump, again, is a revolutionizing president. He's revolutionizing politics. His use of Twitter puts him right up there with Ronald Reagan, Franklin Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln as the great communicators in America. Now, my fellow Democrats are probably rolling over when they hear me say this. And yet it is true. He goes directly to the people through Twitter. And the fact that he's willing to do that and buck the system and stand up for things, people, I think, increasingly are seeing that this is a guy that, okay, maybe a little rough sometimes here and there, but this is a guy we can count on who actually is fighting to keep his promises. And he's keeping them. And he's keeping them.
Promises made, promises kept. What was it like when you woke up in your bed, in your home, for the first time in 8 years?
Great question. I didn't sleep that much that night. It was late and I was tired, but I couldn't fall asleep. And so I got up around 4 o'clock, 4:30, between 4 and 4:30, and it was dark. And there's an alarm system in our home, so I had to try to figure out how to turn that off so I can go downstairs. And so that took about a half an hour. And then in the darkness, as I finally got downstairs, and I didn't want to wake my wife or my daughters, so then I went down to the TV room, and it was dark, and I forgot where the light switch was. And so I'm feeling on the wall to see if I can find that light switch. I never could, so I had to go to a lamp to pull a cord.
New things.
Very new, because I've been gone so long. And then I messed up shaving because I hadn't shaved with a proper razor in nearly 8 years.
Yeah, you came out at the press conference.
I was bleeding.
And you're bleeding.
Yeah.
And you're like, I haven't shaved with a proper razor. And I remember you just kept blotting your chin.
Right.
What kind of razors do they give you in prison?
They get they're like plastic ones. They're one good thing about prison is you don't have to shave every day. Right?
There you go. Well, that question was something that we were sitting here, we were talking, and I looked at Gary and I go, when I go to bed at night, I feel so secure and so happy that he's next to me.
Oh, yeah.
And you wake up in the morning, and that's where our focus is. It's the morning and the bedtime routine with our kids, too. They're little. Right. During the day, you can't control much, but the morning and evening is the focus.
That sounds good.
And it was just remarkable to think about you being able to wake up next to Patty and Patty being able to wake up next to you. And I think everyone can relate to that and sympathize with that no matter what. Mm-hmm. That in itself is such a gift. And you deserve that. And your wife deserves that.
She certainly does. And I'll say, she's, again, thank you for saying those things about her, because she is truly a special person. I never realized how strong she was. I knew she had great qualities, and she was a wonderful wife and a loving mother and a loving daughter-in-law. She was so good to my mother, my late mother, who loved and adored Patty. But I never knew Patty was so tough and strong until all this happened. And so, and then to be able to do what she did, build her own business and raise our daughters.
She stepped in for you on one of the reality TV shows. Yeah. You really got to learn more about Patty during that show. It was incredible.
She did. And then she hooked up with the mystery man, Mark Vargas, and the two of them combined together to do what they did to Here I Am Now because of the two of them.
Yes.
But so here's what I would say to all of your viewers and listeners. Don't take anything for granted, because the blessings that you have, take a step back and appreciate the things that actually matter in life. The people who you love and who love you. It can be a lonely, hard world. And if you can focus yourself on the things that mostly matter, even if you're disappointed in your career, or even if you didn't get the raise you wanted or the promotion you were looking to get, if you're blessed to have a loving family and you have your health, there's truth to all of this. And these are adages that we were raised to believe, but until it's taken from you, you really never realize how important it is. When you get it back, it's just the small things are big things. And I can't begin to tell you, don't squander the opportunities when you have the good times, and embrace them. And then what I hope to do one day is I'd like to be able to be helpful in sharing insights on how you deal with the struggles and adversity, as I've been able to do by drawing on examples of other people who've gone through crushing adversity and have been able to endure and persevere, and then hopefully turn it into something positive, channel it into something good.
Absolutely. That's wonderful.
So how do you plan to make up for lost time? I mean, all those missing years with your kids and your wife, I mean, that's just heartbreaking to think about. And you're not the only person who has to do this. There's a lot of people in prison, but you're one of the lucky ones who got your sentence commuted. How do you plan to make up for some of that lost time?
By doing good. by serving good purposes and being the best father I can be, being a better husband, because I was have always been the more the taker in the relationship than the other way around. To try to get better at that, and I think I'm doing better already, but I still have a long way to go. Anyway, and then to draw from this bad experience and make something good of it, and that's why criminal justice reform, and even discussing how, to the extent that I can, if anybody listens, how wrong our political system, how we've gotten wayward in our politics today. It's just too driven by politics and not driven enough by service and getting things done for people. It's the Democrats meeting in their caucus every morning. This is how it was in Congress when I was there. Mm-hmm. And I supported Nancy Pelosi. I'll plead guilty to that. That I'm remorseful for.
Have you seen her district lately? Like, do you see what's going on in San Francisco?
Yeah, homeless and the rich and the poor, right? And where's the middle class?
But they're defecating in the streets. Yeah. They're robbing. I mean, there was a video that was going around viral. They're literally robbing the drugstores because the police are not enforcing crimes there.
Yes.
And this is what's happening in her district. It's absolutely insane.
Yes. And again, it's like they have the ability to solve these problems. Look at DACA, for example. There's an issue where they could have taken care of the immigrant community, largely Hispanic, that they claim they care so much about, but they were playing politics. They wouldn't work with Trump and give him a wall and work something out with the DACA recipients, which would have, in my mind, would have been the right thing to do, but they didn't do it, and because they just don't want to give him any success, because it's all about the next election. It's never about getting things done for the people. It is, as Winston Churchill said, democracy, the worst system ever devised by man except for all the rest. And yet, one of the things I was able to do in prison, too, was read a lot of books. One of the things that history teaches me is that there are times when those things get corrected, and you get leaders that step up, like a Lincoln, like Teddy Roosevelt, like Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman to a lesser extent, Ronald Reagan, and I have to say President Trump in the same group. He's got the potential, and he's doing it, to actually correct that course and bring us back to another place. He's realigning politics. Working people like my immigrant father, who worked in a factory, steel factory, most of his life. Working moms like my mother, who worked at the Chicago Transit Authority passing out transfers. They never owned a home. They were living the American dream for their children. It was about sacrificing for my brother and me to get the education they never got. This is the American story. The Democrats used to speak to those people, but for a long time they've given up. They've abandoned them. And in the case of the African American community, they've outright not just abandoned them, they've actually sold them out with the 1994 crime bill and with the NAFTA agreement that Clinton pushed. So here comes Donald Trump, a different kind of Republican, talking about readjusting these unfair trade deals and making them start to work for the American people for a change, bringing back those factories and those jobs to places like Western Pennsylvania, Southern Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and places like that. He's transformational, and Trump has the potential to be a truly great president. I really believe that, and he's on his way to do it.
I have a question. It's been killing me. You have the Democrats who are attacking President Trump at every turn, okay? Wouldn't it just make more sense for them to go ahead and join him in some legislative victories, and then they could take credit? Hey, we worked with the president. Everyone wins. Right. So you uplift the American people. Right. The Democrats can take credit. The president can take credit. Everybody wins. What is the problem with that strategy as opposed to what they're doing now?
Isn't that frustrating? Doesn't that drive you crazy?
It does.
Yeah, it's sickening.
It's a simple solution.
I think Trump, being the anti-politician, was shocked by the reality that's not the case. I think he felt as the ultimate deal maker, he'd be able to make deals with them because it's all about give and take, and that is how politics works: horse trading, log rolling, the stuff I was sent to prison for. So I think he was shocked by the resistance. But here again, it's what you have now is you've got the Democratic Party has been captured by the special interests that fund the Democratic Party, and so they are more interested in speaking to their fringe constituencies and all too often to Wall Street. The irony here, too, is the Democratic Party of today is becoming as much, if not more, of the party of Wall Street than the traditional old-time Republican Party. See, Trump's a different Republican, too. He's not the same kind of Republican.
Yes.
And so I think the president has found it to be shocking that they won't make these practical deals, because you're right. You would like to think, and I believe it would be the case, that the chances the Democrats keeping control of the House are actually improved if they actually work with this president and got things done, as opposed to blocking everything. I do believe if President Trump's continue, they're going to lose the House. Trump's going to be president. The Republicans will have the House and the Senate, and they'll really get things done. But when Reagan was president, he was able to get certain things done against partisanship, which was always the case. That's never going to be completely eliminated. But Tip O'Neill was a practical politician who would work with you. And so Reagan was able to win, and the Democrats still had control of the House. So it wasn't like that would be their political suicide. I think Pelosi's made a big mistake tactically by not recognizing that there are areas where she should work with this president instead of always being out to block him.
Oh, she rips up the State of the Union address. That was just absurd. We're out of time, and we've covered a lot of ground here, and I want to thank you for joining us on this GCast. Do you have any other final thoughts you want to?
Well, Gary, I'll tell you what I'm doing for a living now. You want to know?
Yes.
I'm doing this thing called Cameo. It's actually kind of gratifying.
We love Cameo, actually.
I never heard of it until I came home. But I do like these messages, and I'll say, for example, hello, Angie out there. This is Rod Blagojevich. Gary tells me you're celebrating a birthday.
Yes.
And then I'll say certain things that he would like me to say. And my daughter Amy helps me. She's my executive producer. I'm considered in the profession, I guess, it's called the talent.
What a sweetheart. I love that.
She's fantastic. And she's always telling me I shouldn't be saying it that way. I should do it another way. So we actually spent a lot of time at each one of these little cameos. But I think we're bringing a smile on people's faces. And it's kind of nice. It's a way to help pay the rent for a little while anyway.
Yes.
So that's kind of what I'm doing short term. And if anybody needs a greeting for their birthday or whatever the case may be, and they're willing to hold their nose and hear one from me, I'd be happy to do one.
How cool. I love that. And I love this is a project you both are working on together.
Yes. I'm installing the app right now. To go to the Google Play Store or go to the Apple Store, and you can download the app. I've actually used it quite a bit.
Did you do Brett Favre? He does them.
I have not done Brett.
I would recommend him.
I did Wesley Snipes.
Oh, cool.
We did him. Corey Feldman also did one. Yeah. We did Flavor Flav.
Flavor Flav, yes,
did one
we
for
did.
us.
That was
so
fun.
it's really cool to have that, and it's fun to watch, like the people that you've seen, like feeding you a message.
I love it. You did a birthday for me once.
The Playboy models.
Holly
Madison for your birthday. She wished you happy birthday.
It was fun.
Hi, Angie. Happy birthday. I was like,
you know what I like about it?
How's that?
It's heartwarming to actually get the messages from the loved one. So the wife will say, Governor or Rod, would you do a message to my husband? He's such a good dad, and our kids,
so cool.
David and Charlie and John, are the ages. Could you just talk about certain things about what Dad does? And that's what most of these messages are. My grandmother has been sick and she's a little under the weather. Can you give her a shout out? Or a friend at work is having some struggles. Could you give them some inspiration?
It's so personal.
And the people who ask for these are loving people who care about the people that they're asking the messages for.
And they love you too. Well, in some cases, I would think, right? I would hope so.
I hope they're not.
Unless it's Mr. Cass here over at the Tribune.
I sure would like to do a shout out to him.
Do it right now. Give Anderson Cooper a shout out too while you're at it. Oh boy.
I love it. This has been wonderful.
It really has.
I wish you the best. I wish you and your family such a beautiful future moving forward. Spend that time together. I'm taking to heart what you've said. Enjoying your family, enjoying your health, not taking that for granted, moving forward for reform in our justice system, because we need it. We absolutely need it.
I'm very
learning
happy.
from that.
Have you reached
very
out
happy for you. Yes.
Reach out to Kim Kardashian at all? And I know she's working heavily with the president on this in the same respect.
She works with an organization called Cut 50, which Van Jones, who's on CNN, who's actually a real strong advocate of criminal justice reform and a real good guy, very impressive Yale graduate. He's involved in this. Jessica Jackson is the director of that organization. So they've, I think, have engaged the Kardashians, Kim and Kanye West, to be involved in the issue, and they're significant public figures, and they're doing a lot of good. And
they're doing a lot of good.
I hope that maybe, who knows, maybe our paths will cross someday. But congratulations on your lives and your children, your boys.
Thank you.
And the nice little world you guys have carved out for yourselves.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you for being here on the GCast. And we'd love to have you back again soon. And we could get you on, we'll do a cameo We're going to get the mystery man, Mark Vargas, here in that chair at some point and learn all the inner workings of how he actually made it happen.
Thank you, Mark.
Instrumental. And also Michael Alfaro, who also helped me get connected with the Trump campaign and brought me into that room where the president gauged the temperature.
By the way, Gary, thank you for that. Grateful to you for being in that room.
Well,
I'm pretty sure you were the loudest in the room. Anyone who knows you can agree.
Oh, the president looked right at me. I was screaming so loud. He looked at me. So we'll have you back again soon. Folks at home, make sure you share this out across your social networks. Leave your comments below. Rod will be back. He'll probably be in the comments weighing in, and make sure you hit his cameo in the app stores, Google Play and Apple. What do the Apple use? I don't even know.
Oh goodness, I am too, because you made me that way. I haven't switched.
All right, folks. We'll see you once again. Thank you for watching.
Thanks,
the
everybody.
G-Cast. Gary Franchi, Angie Franchi, and Rod Blagojevich, the governor.
That's all we've got for you right now. Gary's got to run. We thank you for tuning into our podcast. If you're hungry for more, head on over to Gary's Next News Network YouTube channel for the latest news and commentary on current events. Until next time, stay gold.